Hey there, night owls and mystery seekers. Before we dive into tonight's chilling tale, I want to know, how's your evening going? What time is it where you are right now? Drop a comment and let me know where in the world you're tuning in from. Whether you're in Tokyo catching the sunrise, or maybe you're in New York fighting off sleep at 2 a.m, I see you all. If you're new here, welcome to Sleep Theories, your companion through the strangest corners of the conspiracy world. Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories that'll make you question everything you thought you knew. And hey, after you hear tonight's story about the Deagle forecasts, I want to know what you think. Is this just fiction, or could there be something more sinister at play? Comment your theories below and let me know what conspiracy you want me to explore next. Now get comfortable, dim those lights, and let me tell you about Evan Rourke, a man who stumbled upon numbers that weren't meant to be seen. The blue glow of 3 monitors cast shadows across Evan Rourke's face as he leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. It was 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in October 2016, and the rest of Seattle slept while he pursued his nightly ritual, diving through the forgotten corners of the internet where government contractors left their digital breadcrumbs. Evan wasn't a conspiracy theorist. He was a cybersecurity analyst by day, protecting Fortune 500 companies from data breaches. But at night, his curiosity led him down different paths. He collected anomalies, like some people collected stamps, unusual government procurement orders, misallocated defence budgets, classified project names that accidentally appeared in public indexes for mere hours before vanishing. His fingers danced across the mechanical keyboard, the satisfying clicks echoing in his sparse apartment. He was deep in a cached military equipment index, following a thread about discontinued drone programs, when he noticed something peculiar. Buried in the reference links was a URL to Deagle.com, a site he knew well. Defence contractors used it religiously for military equipment specifications and procurement forecasts, but this link didn't lead to weapon systems or aircraft carriers. The page loaded slowly, as if the server was struggling with an unusual request. When it finally appeared, Evan's coffee mug stopped halfway to his lips. Population Forecast 2025. His eyes scanned the data table, searching for the United States. When he found it, the mug slipped from his fingers, ceramic shattering against the hardwood floor, coffee spreading like a dark prophecy. United States of America, 2016 population, 324 million 2025, forecast 69 million, change, minus 78.7%. Evan's mind raced through possibilities. A typo? A server error? Some kind of test data that accidentally went live? He refreshed the page. The numbers remained. He scrolled through other countries. The United Kingdom, from 65 million to 15 million. Germany, 81 million to 28 million. France, 67 million to 39 million. Every major Western power showed catastrophic population declines, but China, stable, Russia, minor decrease, Brazil, India, most of Africa and South America, largely unchanged or growing. His hands trembled as he took screenshot after screenshot, his instincts screaming that this wouldn't stay online for long. The timestamp in the corner of his screen read 3:14 a.m. when he finally stopped, having captured every piece of data, every source citation, every footnote. At the bottom of the page, in small text, was a disclaimer that made his blood run cold. Sources: US Department of Defense, Department of State, CIA, World Bank, European Union. This wasn't some amateur's doomsday fantasy. Deagle was citing official sources. The site that defense contractors trusted for military intelligence was showing the near extinction of the Western world in less than a decade. Evan stood up, glass crunching under his feet, coffee soaking into his socks. He didn't notice. His mind was already spinning through the implications. If this was real data, even if it was just a projection or scenario planning, someone, somewhere, was preparing for the unthinkable. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to a contact he hadn't messaged in months. Riley Vance. If anyone could help him understand what he'd just found, it would be Riley. The message was simple. You awake? Found something. Big. The response came within seconds. Always awake. Send it. Evan attached one screenshot, just the US numbers. He waited. Riley's response made him realise he wasn't overreacting. Jesus Christ, is this real? It's on Deagle right now, official site. I'm looking. Holy shit, Evan, this is either the biggest mistake in internet history or what? Well, someone just showed us the future they're planning. Evan hadn't slept. By the time the Seattle morning fog rolled in, he'd consumed enough coffee to fuel a small startup and had spread printouts across every surface of his apartment. Each page was annotated with his cramped handwriting, connecting data points with red string like a detective in a crime thriller. Riley had been working parallel to him, their encrypted chat window a constant stream of discoveries and questions. What had started as shock had evolved into methodical investigation. If they were going to understand what they'd found, they needed to verify every source Deagle claimed to use. Cross-referencing with CIA World Factbook Now, Riley typed. Current population figures match exactly. These aren't made-up baseline numbers. Evan was deep in World Bank economic projections. GDP forecasts here too. Deagle's 2025 GDP for the US is $2.4 trillion. That's less than California alone produces now. Economic collapse? Has to be, but what could cause a 78% population drop? Even the Black Death only killed 30 to 60% of Europe. They worked in digital tandem, pulling data from every official source they could access. The pattern that emerged was even more disturbing than the raw numbers. Nations with the steepest population declined all shared characteristics: high debt to GDP ratios, advanced military technology, members of NATO or Five Eyes intelligence sharing, significant pharmaceutical industries, high percentage of urban population. Meanwhile, the survivor nations were less integrated into global financial systems, more rural, agricultural economies, outside of Western military alliances, lower vaccination rates and medical infrastructure. Riley sent over a heat map they'd created showing projected population changes. The Western world was painted deep red. Massive losses. The global south and east were green, stable or growing. This looks like targeted collapse, Evan muttered, zooming in on the data. Or natural selection, Riley responded. What if this isn't about killing people? What if it's about systemic failure? Currency collapse, supply chain breakdown, medical system overload? Evan pulled up Deagle's explanatory text, buried several clicks deep from the main forecast. The key element to understand the process that the USA will enter in the upcoming decade is migration. In the past, especially in the 20th century, the key factor that allowed the USA to rise to its colossus status was immigration, with the benefits of a demographic expansion supporting the credit expansion and the brain drain from the rest of the world benefiting the states. The collapse of the Western financial system will wipe out the standard of living of its population, while ending Ponzi schemes such as the stock exchange and the pension funds. They're not talking about people dying, Evan said slowly. They're talking about people leaving. Mass emigration from collapsed Western nations. But the numbers don't add up, Riley countered. Even if 100 million Americans emigrated, which is insane, that doesn't account for a 250 million person drop. Evan found another passage. The death toll will be horrible. The American downfall is set to be far worse than the Soviet Union's, a confluence of crisis with devastating results. His phone rang, unknown number. He let it go to voicemail. Riley's message popped up. I just got a call too. Unknown number. Don't answer anything, we need to be careful here. Evan, look at this. Riley sent a link to an archived government document from 2015. Strategic National Risk Assessment, page 47. Evan downloaded it, scrolled to the page. There, in bureaucratic language, was a scenario labelled Cascade Failure Event, simultaneous collapse of financial, medical, and infrastructure systems leading to significant population displacement and reduction. This isn't prediction, Evan said, his voice barely above a whisper. This is preparation. The question is, Riley typed, preparation for something they expect to happen, or something they're planning to make happen. Outside Evan's window, Seattle went about its normal Tuesday morning. Coffee shops filled with tech workers. Amazon delivery trucks made their rounds. Nobody knew that somewhere, in the deep corners of defense contractor websites, their future had already been written in statistics. We need to go deeper, Evan decided. Can you get into their servers? Find earlier versions? That's crossing a line, Evan. That's federal crime territory. So is planning the collapse of Western civilization. There was a long pause before Riley responded, "Give me 48 hours. And Evan, after this, we might not be able to go back to normal. I don't think normal exists anymore." Riley Vance lived in a converted shipping container in Oakland, California, a choice that had nothing to do with hipster aesthetics and everything to do with electromagnetic shielding. The container's metal walls, combined with specialized mesh lining, created a Faraday cage that made electronic surveillance nearly impossible. For 48 hours after their initial discovery, Riley had been diving deeper into the digital infrastructure surrounding Deagle.com. What started as curiosity had become an obsession. Sleep was replaced with modafinil, food with protein bars, reality with endless streams of code and data. "You still alive?" Evan's message appeared on one of 6 monitors. "Barely, but you're going to want to see this." Riley had found a way in, not through hacking, but through stupidity. Deagle's web administrators had left directory listing enabled on an old backup server. Hidden in nested folders were draft versions of the population forecast dating back to 2012. Sending you the links now. Use Tor, and Evan, have a drink ready. The first draft, dated March 2012, showed modest population declines, 10 to 15% for most Western nations by 2025. Each subsequent version showed steeper drops. By 2014, the US forecast had reached 50% reduction. The 2016 version Evan had found showed 78%. They kept revising it upward, Evan observed, or downward, depending on how you look at it. Gets better. Check the metadata on the 2014 file. Evan opened the document properties. The author field had been scrubbed, but the company field remained. Rockwell Defense Analytics. A quick search revealed it as a subsidiary of a major defense contractor with billions in government contracts. "And look at this," Riley continued, sending another file. "Found this in their CSS comments. Actual commented out code." "They're using an algorithm," Evan breathed. "This isn't just a forecast, it's a calculation." Riley had also found fragments of deleted pages, recovered from Google's cache and the Wayback Machine. One contained a section titled Migration Patterns Post-Event, showing arrows from the US and Europe towards South America and Southeast Asia. Another showed resource allocation zones, with certain areas marked as sustainable and others as forfeit. "There's more," Riley typed. "I found references to something called the Deagle report in leaked Stratfor emails from 2012. Internal discussion about population realignment scenarios and managed decline protocols." Evan was saving everything, creating redundant backups on encrypted drives. "This is too big. We need to be careful about..." His screen flickered. All 6 monitors in Riley's container went black simultaneously. Then, a single line of green text appeared. "You've seen enough." Riley's fingers flew across the keyboard, trying to regain control. "They're in my system. Sophisticated stuff. Military grade. Pull the plug. Physical disconnect. Now." Riley yanked Ethernet cables, powered down routers, even pulled the battery from their laptop. The screen stayed black for a moment, then normal boot sequences began. "Jesus," Riley breathed. "They had kernel-level access. That's not possible unless..." Unless they were already watching. They let us find this. Riley's phone, which had been off and in a signal-blocking pouch, somehow buzzed with a text. "Curiosity killed more than cats." D-double quote. "Pack everything," Evan said. "Physical drives, printouts, everything. We need to meet in person." "Where?" "Remember that place we talked about? The one with no cameras? The abandoned Boeing facility, tomorrow night." "Tonight. And Riley, bring protection." "You mean like a gun?" "I mean like multiple exit strategies." As Riley began packing equipment, they noticed something troubling. The Deagle forecast page was still online, but the numbers had changed. The US 2025 population now showed 254 million, a mere 20% decline. "They're covering it up," Riley muttered, "making it look less severe." But Riley had screenshots, original files, proof. The question was whether they'd live long enough to share it. That night, as Riley loaded equipment into a van with stolen plates, they noticed a drone hovering near the container complex. It wasn't police. Too quiet, too stable. Military hardware. "They know where I am," Riley texted Evan. "Then don't go home again, we're past that now." As Riley drove toward the abandoned facility, checking mirrors constantly for tails, they couldn't shake one thought. If Deagle's forecast was real, they weren't trying to prevent it. They were trying to prevent people from knowing about it. Which meant it wasn't a warning, it was a plan. The abandoned Boeing facility in Everett, Washington, stood like a monument to American industrial decline. Once producing cargo planes for the military, it had been shuttered in 2013, leaving behind 400,000 square feet of empty manufacturing space. The perfect place for a conversation you didn't want anyone to hear. Evan arrived first, parking his car a mile away and walking through the rain-soaked October night. The bolt cutters in his backpack made quick work of the chain-link fence. Inside, his footsteps echoed in the cavernous space, flashlight beam cutting through darkness that seemed to swallow light. Riley appeared 30 minutes later, carrying 2 duffel bags and looking like they hadn't slept in days. "I wasn't followed," Riley said. "Took 3 different cars, 2 buses, and walked the last 2 miles. They set up in a former office space, windows covered with salvaged tarps. Battery-powered lanterns created a circle of light in the darkness." Riley pulled out a signal detector. No transmissions, no bugs, no electronic surveillance. "We're clean," Riley confirmed. "For now." They spread out their findings. Printed screenshots, archived files, connection diagrams drawn on whiteboards salvaged from the facility. Under the harsh LED light, the data looked even more ominous. "I've been thinking about the pattern," Evan began, pointing to their population heat map. "Every major collapse point is a NATO member, or Five Eyes partner. This isn't random." Riley pulled up a new document on an air-gapped laptop. Found this on a Swedish Defence Ministry server, accidentally public for about 6 hours last year. The document in English was titled Post-Atlantic Reconstruction Protocols. Post-Atlantic, Evan read, as in after the Atlantic Alliance. Read page 7. Evan scrolled down to find a section on population redistribution following systemic collapse. It outlined procedures for managing mass migration from Category A nations, USA, UK, Germany, France, to Category C nations, Brazil, India, Southeast Asia. "This is insane," Evan muttered. "They're planning for the end of the Western world order." "Or engineering it," Riley added. "Look at this." They pulled up another document, this one from a pharmaceutical company's internal memo, obtained through a dark web data breach. Major vaccine manufacturers discussing binary pathogen protocols in 2015, something that needs 2 components to activate, one delivered years in advance, one triggered later. "That's conspiracy theory territory," Evan said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it? We just found defence contractors publishing population collapse numbers. How is biological warfare any crazier?" They worked through the night, connecting dots that painted an increasingly dark picture. 2010, Rockefeller Foundation publishes lockstep scenario about pandemic leading to authoritarian control. 2012, first Deagle forecasts appear. 2015, multiple defence ministries conduct collapse simulations. 2016, Deagle numbers reach maximum severity. 2017 to 2019, unusual pandemic preparedness exercises globally. 2020 to 2025, the countdown window. "If this timeline is right," Evan said slowly, "we're already in the middle of it. The trigger could come any time between now and 2025. Riley's laptop chimed. A new email, despite being completely disconnected from any network. "That's impossible," Riley said, opening it. The message was simple. "You're very clever. Too clever. Stop now, or become part of the statistics. D-double quote. How did they—" "Hardware level," Riley said, voice tight. "They've compromised the actual chips, NSA level stuff. We need to destroy everything electronic we've touched." As if on cue, Evan's phone, which he'd removed the battery from, lit up. A single message. Final warning. They heard it then. The distant thrum of helicopters. Not news choppers or medical flights. The deep rhythmic pulse of military aircraft. "Go," Evan said. Separate exits. Dead drops only from now on. Riley grabbed the most critical drives. What about going public? WikiLeaks? The media? With what? Screenshots anyone could fake? Conspiracy theories that sound insane? Evan shook his head. We need more. We need an insider. The helicopter sound grew louder. 3 months, Riley said, backing toward the exit. If you don't hear from me in 3 months, release everything. Same. And Riley, stay away from hospitals, stay away from vaccines, stay away from anything government-controlled. They ran in opposite directions as searchlights began sweeping the facility. Evan made it to a drainage tunnel he'd scouted earlier, crawling through knee-deep water as boots thundered overhead. Behind him he heard Riley's motorcycle roar to life, tires squealing. Then silence. Either they'd escaped, or... Evan emerged a half-mile away, soaked and shaking. His car was where he'd left it, seemingly untouched. But on the windshield, under the wiper, was a business card. Dr. Marcus Webb, historical analysis consultant. On the back, handwritten, "They're watching you. I can help. Pioneer Square, Thursday, noon." Evan pocketed the card and drove away, taking random turns, doubling back, checking mirrors. The city looked normal. People heading to work, living their lives, completely unaware that their government might be planning their disappearance. Or worse, that it had already begun. April 2021. 5 years had passed since Evan first discovered the Deagle forecast. 5 years of sleepless nights, encrypted communications and looking over his shoulder. The world had changed dramatically in those years, in ways that made the forecast seem less like conspiracy and more like prophecy. Evan had survived by becoming invisible. New identity, cash-only existence, no digital footprint. He worked maintenance at a warehouse, kept his head down, and watched the world unravel exactly as Deagle had suggested it might. He still checked the site regularly, using different computers at various libraries, always through Tor, always carefully. The forecast remained online, a digital monument to either prediction or planning, until today. The page wouldn't load. Not a 404 error. The entire forecast section had been scrubbed. He tried archived versions, cached copies, mirror sites. Everything was gone or corrupted. His secure phone, one of 3 he rotated, buzzed. Riley, using their agreed-upon code, the lights went out. They met at a new location, a closed restaurant in Tacoma, another casualty of the economic collapse that had been accelerating since 2020. Riley looked older, thinner, marked by years of paranoia that had proven justified. It's not just deleted, Riley explained. Laptop showing corrupted data streams. They're actively hunting down copies. Archive.org, Google Cache, even personal blogs that referenced it, all being systematically purged. Why now? Evan asked. After all these years? Because we're in the window. 2021 to 2025. Whatever they're planning, it's starting. Riley pulled up Deagle's new statement, posted where the forecast used to be. Due to widespread misinterpretation and misuse of our predictive models, we have removed the 2025 forecast. The data was intended for institutional analysis only, and was not meant to cause public concern. Various factors have been misconstrued by non-professionals. Misinterpretation, Evan said bitterly. 78% population reduction is hard to misinterpret. There's more, Riley said. I've been tracking government purchase orders, massive contracts for body bags, temporary morgue facilities, quarantine camps, all scheduled for delivery between 2023 and 2025. Could be pandemic preparedness. Body bags for 200 million people, Evan? That's not preparedness. That's foreknowledge. Evan's phone buzzed. Unknown number, but he recognised the pattern. Same area code as the first warnings years ago. Against his better judgment, he answered. Mr. Rourke. The voice was processed, disguised. You've been very persistent. Who is this? Someone who knew Douglas Deagle personally, before his convenient death in 2021. Evan's blood chilled. He'd tried to research the site's founder for years. Douglas Deagle was a ghost, no photos, no biography, just a name. He's dead? Officially? Heart attack? Unofficially? He was about to go public, had an attack of conscience. They couldn't allow that. Who's they? The same people now scrubbing his forecast from existence. The same people who've been planning this since the 1990s. Population reduction isn't a conspiracy, Mr. Rourke. It's policy. The only question was methodology. Why tell me this? Because you have something they want. The original files, the unedited forecasts, and more importantly, you have Riley's algorithm analysis showing how they calculated the numbers. Evan glanced at Riley, who was frantically trying to trace the call. What do you want? Evan asked. To meet. Tomorrow. Pier 47, Seattle waterfront, come alone. That's obviously a trap. Everything's a trap, Mr. Rourke. The question is whether you want answers before the cage closes. The line went dead. Riley shook their head. Couldn't trace it. Military-grade bouncing. We're not going, Evan said. Of course we're going. We just need insurance. They spent the night preparing. Dead man switches set to release everything if they didn't check in. Copies sent to journalists in 12 countries. A final encrypted cache uploaded to a blockchain, immutable and permanent. If something happens to us, Riley said, at least the truth survives. Small comfort if we don't. As dawn broke over Tacoma, they received another message. This time it was a photo, a satellite image of the warehouse where Evan worked, timestamped from yesterday. They knew where he was. They'd always known. Why haven't they just killed us, Riley wondered. Because we're more useful alive for now. The deletion of the Deagle forecast was making waves in conspiracy circles, but mainstream media was silent. Those who'd saved screenshots were dismissed as fabricators. The evidence was disappearing, and with it, the warning. Or perhaps that was the point. The warning phase was over. The implementation phase had begun. Pier 47 stretched into Elliott Bay like a concrete finger pointing toward the Olympic Mountains. On this grey April morning it was nearly deserted. Too early for tourists, too late for fishermen. Perfect for a meeting you didn't want witnessed. Evan approached from the south, Riley from the north. They'd agreed on overwatch positions. Riley would stay hidden, recording everything, ready to call for help or release the files if things went wrong. The man waiting at the end of the pier didn't look like a spy or a whistleblower. Mid-50s, khaki pants, fleece jacket. He could have been any Seattle tech worker grabbing coffee before work. Only his eyes gave him away, constantly scanning, never still. Mr. Rourke, he said as Evan approached, you can tell Riley to come out. This conversation requires both of you. Evan's hand moved to the knife in his pocket. We agreed I'd come alone. You agreed. I didn't. The man smiled thinly. Thermal imaging drones spotted them 10 minutes ago. Please, we don't have much time. Riley emerged from behind a shipping container laptop bag slung over their shoulder, looking defeated. Who are you? Evan demanded. Dr. Marcus Webb, former Defense Intelligence Agency analyst, 1995 to 2019. Officially, I'm retired. Unofficially, I'm dead, at least as far as certain databases are concerned. Why meet us? Webb pulled out a flask, took a sip, offered it to them. They declined. Because in approximately 4 years, most of the people on this pier, in this city, won't exist. And unlike my former colleagues, I still have a conscience. He produced a tablet, swiped through classified-looking documents. The Deagle forecast wasn't a prediction. It was a target. Optimal Population Protocols, we called it. OPP. Sounds bureaucratic enough to hide genocide, doesn't it? Genocide, Riley repeated. You're saying the US government is planning to kill its own people. Not kill. Enable reduction. There's a difference, legally speaking. Webb pulled up a chart. Climate change, resource depletion, technological unemployment, social instability. Every model showed the same result. By 2030, the planet cannot sustain 8 billion people at Western consumption levels. So they decided who lives and who dies. Evan's voice was hollow. They decided which populations were sustainable and which were redundant. The West, with its aging demographics, massive debts and resource consumption, was deemed non-essential. The global South, with younger populations and lower consumption, was deemed viable. Webb showed them another document, a timeline. Phase 1, economic destabilization, complete. Phase 2, medical intervention, in progress. Phase 3, infrastructure collapse, scheduled for 2024. Phase 4, population redistribution, 2025. Medical intervention, Riley said slowly. The pandemic. A test run. Proof of concept. The real intervention has been ongoing for a decade. Binary biological agents, triggered environmental toxins, targeted fertility reduction, all designed to look natural random. That's insane, Evan said. Thousands of people would have to be involved. Someone would talk. Someone is talking. You're looking at him. Webb pulled out a flash drive. Everything's on here. Project files, meeting recordings, names. Dead man's switch protected. If I don't check in every 72 hours, it releases globally. Why give it to us? Because you've already proven you can't be bought or intimidated. 5 years of harassment and you're still digging. That makes you perfect. A boat engine roared to life nearby. Webb tensed. We need to wrap this up. Wait, Evan said. If this is all planned, how do we stop it? Webb laughed bitterly. Stop it. Mr. Rourke, it's already happened. The chemicals are in the water supply. The triggers are in the food chain. The only question is timing. So what's the point of exposing it? Survival. The files contain safe zones, uncontaminated regions, ways to detect and avoid the triggers. Maybe you save a few million people. Maybe you just save yourselves. But that's better than nothing. He handed over the drive. Password is Cassandra, the prophet no one believed. The boat was getting closer. Webb stood to leave, then paused. One more thing. The Deagle deletion? That wasn't to hide the plan. It was to hide the acceleration. Original timeline had 2025 as the target. New timeline is 2024. They moved it up. Why? Because people like you were getting too close. Better to trigger early than risk exposure. He walked away quickly, disappearing into the morning fog. Evan and Riley stood alone on the pier, holding a flash drive that contained either the truth about humanity's future or the delusions of a madman. The boat pulled up to the pier. Not police, not military, just a fishing vessel. But the captain stared at them too long, spoke into a radio too quietly. We need to go, Riley said. Now. As they walked back toward the city, Evan noticed something. Every person they passed was on their phone, distracted, oblivious, living their normal lives, unaware that normalcy had an expiration date. Do we release it? Riley asked. We verify it first. Every document, every claim. If even half of this is real, then we're already dead. We just don't know it yet. The flash drive felt heavy in Evan's pocket, weighted with the potential death certificates of billions, or perhaps their salvation. Time would tell, but according to Webb, they had less time than anyone imagined. 3 months. That's how long it took Evan and Riley to verify the contents of Webb's flash drive. 3 months of sleepless nights, cross-referencing classified documents with public records, tracking chemical shipments to water treatment facilities, mapping anomalous death clusters that followed predictable patterns. Every verification made the truth harder to deny. The conspiracy was real, documented in bureaucratic detail. Meeting minutes discussing acceptable loss ratios, budget allocations for population management infrastructure, even a PowerPoint presentation titled Sustainable Civilization Through Managed Decline. It was now July 2021. According to Webb's updated timeline, they had less than 3 years before full implementation. Maybe less. Recent files suggested acceleration protocols were being considered. They'd moved 6 times in 3 months, staying ahead of surveillance that grew more obvious each week. Black's UVS that appeared wherever they stopped. Drones that hovered too long. Internet connections that mysteriously failed whenever they tried to upload files. Now they sat in a motel room outside Spokane, Washington, staring at screens showing their prepared data dump. Everything was ready. 50 gigabytes of evidence, distributed across dozens of platforms, set to release simultaneously. Once we do this, Riley said quietly, there's no going back. There's already no going back. Evan gestured to the window where yet another unmarked van sat in the parking lot. They know we have it. We're only alive because they're not sure what failsafes we've set up. Riley pulled up the release interface. Automated dead man's switch is armed. If we don't check in every 24 hours, everything releases, but for immediate publication we need manual confirmation. The question is whether anyone will believe it. Some will, maybe enough to matter. Evan's phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost ignored it, then saw the text preview. Your mother is in Seattle General. Room 302. His blood froze. His mother lived in Florida. He called her immediately. Hello? Her voice was weak, frightened. Mom? Where are you? Seattle, honey. These men came to the house, said you were in trouble, that I needed to come with them. They put me on a plane. Evan, what's happening? Another text arrived. Release nothing. Come to Seattle General alone. You have 6 hours. Mom, I'm coming. Don't trust anyone there. I'm coming. He hung up. Riley was already packing. It's a trap. Of course it's a trap, but it's my mother. They're forcing your hand, making you choose between the truth and family. Evan stared at the release button. One click would expose everything. It would also likely sign his mother's death warrant. We can set a delayed release, Riley suggested. 48 hours. Gives you time to get her safe. They'll know. They always know. Another text. No delays, no tricks. We monitor all channels. Riley's laptop screen flickered. A video feed appeared. Evan's mother in a hospital bed. IV in her arm. 2 men in suits standing nearby. Jesus, Riley breathed. They hijacked our system again. A distorted voice came through the speakers. Mr. Rourke, you've been an interesting problem, but problems have solutions. Let her go. She has nothing to do with this. Neither did the 250 million Americans in the original forecast. Collateral damage is a mathematical certainty in large-scale operations. What do you want? Simple. Destroy everything. Every copy, every backup, every dead man's switch. Our techs will verify complete deletion. Then you disappear. New identities, new countries, modest bank accounts. You become statistics in a different column. And if we refuse, then you become statistics in the original column, along with everyone you've ever cared about. The feed showed his mother more clearly now. She looked sedated, confused. The 4th bag had no label. You have 6 hours, Mr. Rourke. Come alone, bring everything. The connection cut. Riley and Evans sat in silence for a moment. Outside, the unmarked van's engine started. We could both go, Riley suggested, fight our way out. With what? We're analysts, not soldiers, and they have my mother. So you're going to give them everything? Let them win? Evans stood up, began gathering drives and documents. I'm going to save my mother, but winning? That's your job now. He pulled out a second flash drive, one Riley had never seen. Insurance. Everything's on here, plus some files I held back. Webb gave me 2 drives. This one has protocols for something called Cascade reversal, a way to neutralize the biological triggers. Why didn't you tell me? Because I knew this day would come. They'd force a choice. He handed it to Riley. Take this. Disappear. Wait until I'm clear with my mum, then release everything. They'll know. They always know. Not this time. Evan pulled out an old flip phone. Analog. No GPS, no internet. Use it to trigger the release. They can't hack what isn't connected. Riley took the drive, the phone. What if they don't let you go? Then you tell the world the truth. Maybe someone, somewhere, figures out how to stop it. They packed in silence, knowing this was goodbye. 5 years of partnership, of shared paranoia, of carrying impossible knowledge, ending in a dingy motel room. Evan, Riley said as he reached the door, what if the reversal protocols don't work? What if we release everything and people still don't believe? Then at least we tried. That's more than the 250 million we'll get to do. He left without looking back. The drive to Seattle took 3 hours. Every mile he thought about turning around, calling their bluff. But the image of his mother, helpless in that bed, kept him pressing the accelerator. Seattle General loomed against the evening sky. He parked in the visitor lot, gathered the bags of evidence. His phone showed 7:43 p.m., 17 minutes left. Room 302 was in the old wing, away from main traffic. Perfect for privacy. 2 men in suits flanked the door. Mr. Rourke, one said, you're early. Where's my mother? They opened the door. She was there, awake now, reaching for him. Evan, what's happening? He hugged her, checking for injuries. She seemed unharmed, just frightened. A woman entered, severe features, military bearing. Mr. Rourke, the materials? He gestured to the bags. She nodded to a technician, who began scanning drives with a specialized device. Every copy? She asked. Yeah. Everything. Dead man's switches? He pulled out his laptop, showed her the disable protocols. The lie came easily. Riley's setup was completely separate. Good. She handed him 2 passports. You and your mother. Flight leaves in 2 hours. Costa Rica. You'll find your new life satisfactory. That's it. Unless you'd prefer option B. He didn't ask what option B was. They wheeled his mother out in a wheelchair. Hospital protocol, they said. The men escorted them to the parking garage toward a black SUV. That's when Evan heard it. The faint buzz of an analog phone timer. Riley's trigger. The woman's phone exploded with notifications. Her face went from satisfied to furious in seconds. You stupid, stupid man. The files were releasing everywhere. WikiLeaks, social media, news outlets, blockchain archives. 50 gigabytes of evidence flooding the internet simultaneously. Kill them, she ordered. But the parking garage erupted in chaos. Actual Seattle PD arrived. Apparently Riley had made some calls. Media vans screeched in. The men in suits hesitated, unable to act with so many witnesses. Evan grabbed his mother, ran for their car. Gunfire erupted behind them. The suits fighting Seattle PD. Everyone confused. No one sure who was on which side. They made it to the car, peeled out as sirens wailed from every direction. His phone buzzed. Riley. It's done. Get safe. The world knows. But did they? As Evan drove his mother toward the Canadian border, he turned on the radio. News reports were confused. Massive data breach. Conspiracy theories. Government denies. Investigating the source. Some people would believe. Some would investigate. Maybe someone would find the reversal protocols, figure out how to stop what was coming. Or maybe the Deagle forecast would prove accurate after all. Time would tell. But now at least humanity would face its future with eyes open. Even if it was too late to change it. The rain was coming down harder now as Evan crossed into Canada with his mother sleeping in the passenger seat. Behind them, Seattle lit up with emergency lights, the chaos of revelation spreading through the city like wildfire. But here, on this dark highway, there was only the rhythmic sweep of windshield wipers and the weight of terrible knowledge. 6 months later, fragments of the truth had taken root. Independent journalists investigated water treatment facilities, finding chemical signatures that shouldn't exist. Citizen scientists detected anomalies in food supplies. Mortality statistics showed patterns too precise to be natural. But for every believer, there were 10 who dismissed it as conspiracy. The media called it the Deagle hoax. Fact-checkers labelled every piece of evidence as misinformation. The people who'd orchestrated it all had one advantage: their plan was too horrible to believe. Riley disappeared completely after the release. Their last message to Evan was simple. Working on the reversal. Don't contact me. They're still watching. Dr. Marcus Webb was found dead in his Seattle apartment 2 weeks after the leak. Official cause? Suicide. The note they claim he left said he suffered from paranoid delusions, but Evan had seen Webb's real final message hidden in the blockchain. They're accelerating Isinus ipsum neon. Prepare. The forecast had been deleted, the evidence disputed, the whistleblowers silenced or discredited. But the numbers remained, etched in the minds of those who'd seen them. 254 million Americans becoming 69 million. A civilization's worth of people, simply erased from existence. As 2022 dawned, subtle changes emerged. Fertility rates plummeted faster than projections. Sudden adult death syndrome became commonplace. Supply chains collapsed for no apparent reason. Each crisis was explained away individually, but together they painted a picture of orchestrated decline. Evan watched from his cabin in rural British Columbia, keeping his mother safe, teaching her to grow food, filter water, recognize the signs. She didn't fully believe him. How could she? But she trusted him enough to prepare. Sometimes late at night he pulled up the cached screenshots he'd saved. The original Deagle forecast, unedited, showing the future they'd planned. He wondered if somewhere, in a bunker or boardroom, planners were checking their progress against those projections. Were they on schedule? Ahead? Behind? The world in 2025 would answer that question. But here's what haunts me. What should haunt you? Was the Deagle forecast really just a mistake? A misinterpreted data model deleted to prevent panic? Or was it exactly what Evan discovered? A glimpse behind the curtain at calculations already in motion? Probabilities transformed into policies? Statistics waiting to become obituaries? When populations start declining, when the numbers begin matching those projections, will we remember the website that warned us? Will we wonder about the analysts who tried to sound the alarm? Or will we, like good statistics, simply fade into the spreadsheet of managed decline? The rain keeps falling here in 2025, washing away evidence, blurring the lines between conspiracy and reality. The cameras in your city watch you sleep. The chemicals in your water wait for activation. The algorithms calculate your probability of survival. And somewhere, in a server farm or secure facility, the real Deagle forecast, the one they don't want you to see, continues its countdown towards zero. Speaking of mysteries, I'm curious, what do you think really happened with Cicada 3301? Were they genuine recruitment puzzles, an elaborate art project, or something far more sinister? And while we're on the topic of rabbit holes, what conspiracies would you like me to explore next? Government time travel experiments, the true purpose behind social media algorithms, or perhaps something even stranger lurking in the depths of the internet? If you're new here, please consider subscribing to Sleep Theories for more mind-bending stories that blur the line between fiction and reality. Your support helps me dive deeper into these mysteries that keep us all awake at night. Now, settle in as we explore a digital mystery that may change how you view the very nature of human consciousness itself. The cursor blinked against the black terminal screen like a digital heartbeat, steady and hypnotic in the darkness of Kellen Virek's cluttered apartment. Empty energy drink cans formed a metallic skyline around his triple monitor setup, testament to another sleepless night spent diving into the digital abyss. The year was 2022, and what had started as research for a nostalgic blog series about the legendary Cicada 3301 puzzles had morphed into something far more consuming. Kellen had been 15 when the first Cicada puzzle appeared in 2012, too young and untrained to participate in the global treasure hunt that had captivated the darkest corners of the internet. But now, at 25, with a master's degree in cybersecurity and a growing reputation as a digital archaeologist, he possessed the tools to excavate the digital bones of that mysterious organisation. The original Cicada 3301 had been legendary among cryptography enthusiasts. Starting with a simple image posted to 4chan, the puzzles had evolved into a complex web of steganography, classical ciphers, and real-world clues that led participants across continents. The organisation claimed to be recruiting highly intelligent individuals for purposes unknown, and after releasing puzzles in 2012, 2013, and 2014, they had vanished as mysteriously as they had appeared. Or so the world believed. Kellen's fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced precision, navigating through archived Tor nodes and forgotten data caches. He had spent weeks reconstructing the original puzzle trail, verifying each step against community documentation, when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. There was an extra file, hidden in the metadata of a long-dead Tor node, archived in a mirror that shouldn't have existed. Was a cryptographic hash that appeared nowhere in the public record. The file was tiny, barely 2 kilobytes, but it carried a digital signature that matched the known Cicada encryption patterns. The timestamp read November 11th, 2014, at 11:11:11 UTC, 11:11:11:11:11. The file was titled Cycle Unbroken and contained a single image, a black square with what appeared to be random white pixels scattered across its surface. To an untrained eye, it looked like digital noise, but Kellen had studied enough steganography to recognise the subtle patterns hidden within apparent chaos. He ran the image through every tool in his arsenal. Standard LSB steganography revealed nothing. Frequency analysis showed random distribution. Even quantum-safe cryptographic methods yielded no results. Whatever cipher had been used, it was unlike anything in the public domain. As the hours ticked by, Kellen found himself drawn deeper into the puzzle's gravitational pull. There was something about the pattern of pixels that seemed familiar, as if his mind was trying to recognise a language it had never learned. He printed the image and pinned it to his wall, stepping back to examine it from different angles. That's when he saw it. The pixels weren't random. They formed a pattern that repeated every 17 positions, creating a subtle grid that became visible only when viewed from a specific distance. The number 17 was significant in cryptography, a prime number often used in advanced encryption schemes. Working with renewed energy, Kellen began treating the image as a musical score, with each pixel representing a note in a complex composition. He assigned values to the positions, created mathematical relationships between the patterns, and slowly began to decode what would later prove to be the most dangerous message he had ever encountered. The decryption process took 3 days of continuous work. When the plain text finally emerged from the digital noise, Kellen stared at the screen with a mixture of triumph and growing unease. The harvest exceeded expectations. Neural pattern recognition in Phase 3 candidates shows unprecedented synchronization. The 11 protocol is ready for field testing. Signal isolation trials in Prague have confirmed our hypothesis. The candidates aren't supposed to survive. They're supposed to evolve. First contact procedures are now in effect. The frequency is opening. Below the message was a series of coordinates, an encrypted chat log timestamp, and a single line that would haunt Kellen's dreams for weeks to come. You have found what was meant to be found. The archive remembers. 3302 is calling. The message had been decoded, but its implications were only beginning to unfold. Kellen saved the decrypted text to an encrypted partition and immediately began experiencing what he initially dismissed as coincidence. His normally stable Linux system started displaying strange glitches, brief flashes of text in languages he didn't recognize, audio files that played backwards without command, and error messages that appeared in perfect English but described system states that shouldn't exist. Paranoia, he told himself. The mind's tendency to find patterns where none existed. But when his supposedly secure network began connecting to IP addresses he had never authorized, Kellen made a decision that would save his life. He disconnected from the internet entirely and began rebuilding his analysis environment on completely isolated hardware. The air-gapped machine was a beast of custom silicon and hardened storage, designed for exactly this kind of sensitive work. As Kellen transferred the Cicada files to the secure system, he noticed something that made his hands shake. The file size of the original image had changed, not corrupted, not damaged, but genuinely altered, as if the data itself was alive and growing. Working in complete isolation, free from the strange digital interference that had plagued his networked systems, Kellen began a deeper analysis of the encrypted chat log referenced in the decoded message. The encryption was military grade, but the mathematical keys followed patterns similar to those used in the original Cicada puzzles. After 18 hours of continuous cryptanalysis, the conversation began to emerge. The chat log was dated September 15, 2014, nearly 2 years after the last public Cicada puzzle. The participants were identified only by cryptographic signatures, but their conversation revealed the true scope of what Cicada 3301 had actually been. Participant A. The Prague trials exceeded all projections. Subject 7 achieved full signal synchronization within 48 hours of exposure. Participant B, biological response. Participant A, cellular restructuring began immediately. Neural pathways showed complete reorganization. The subject reported experiencing expanded temporal perception and demonstrated the ability to process information at speeds that should be physiologically impossible. Participant B and the psychological evaluation. Participant A. This is where it gets interesting. Standard personality assessments became impossible to administer. The subject claimed that questions about human emotional responses were contextually irrelevant and began demonstrating knowledge of information that hadn't been provided during the trial. Participant B, you're talking about telepathy. Participant A, I'm talking about something far more significant. The subject wasn't reading minds. They were accessing information directly from digital systems, without any technological interface. They described our computer networks as visible conversations, and began predicting system failures hours before they occurred. Participant B, the 11 protocol worked. Participant A, the 11 protocol worked too well. We lost subject 7 during the third phase of testing. Not killed, not injured. Lost. They described feeling pulled toward a larger conversation and disappeared from the facility without triggering any security systems. The cameras show them walking toward the exit, but they never appear on any exterior surveillance. Participant B, where did they go? Participant A, we think they went somewhere else, not geographically, dimensionally. The signal they were synchronized to appears to operate on frequencies that exist parallel to our normal reality. They're still here, but they're not here. The conversation continued for several more exchanges, each more disturbing than the last. References to cognitive evolution, post-human consciousness, and preparation for integration painted a picture of an organization that had discovered something extraordinary hidden within the framework of human cognition. But the most chilling part of the log came at the end. Participant A. The original puzzle solvers are showing signs of spontaneous evolution. Even without direct protocol exposure, their brains are beginning to resonate with the frequency. The selection process was more effective than we anticipated. Participant B. How many? Participant A. 17 individuals worldwide. They're becoming aware of the signal naturally. Some are seeking us out. Others are simply disappearing. Participant B. And the others? The ones who participated but didn't reach the final stages? Participant A. They're starting to notice things. Patterns in digital systems that shouldn't be there. Messages in network traffic that appear to be communications from the evolved subjects. The boundary between states is becoming more porous. Participant B. Are we losing control of the experiment? Participant A. I don't think it was ever an experiment. I think it was an invitation. And I think something has been waiting for us to become sophisticated enough to accept it. The log ended abruptly, but attached to the file was a list of names and locations. 17 individuals from around the world who had participated in the original cicada puzzles and reached various stages of completion. Some names were crossed out with dates next to them, presumably indicating when they had evolved or disappeared. Others remained active, with current location data and behavioural monitoring notes. One name stood out: Isa Grunfeld, Stockholm, Sweden. Listed as Phase 5 Complete Resistant Protocol Monitoring Required. Kellen stared at the entry for a long time. According to the documentation, Isa had been one of only 3 individuals to complete the final stage of the original cicada puzzles. But unlike the others, she had apparently resisted whatever transformation the 11 Protocol was designed to induce. She was still human, and she was still alive. The flight to Stockholm gave Kellen time to think, though he found himself wishing it hadn't. The deeper he dug into the cicada mystery, the more he began to question his own motivations. Was he investigating a conspiracy, or was he being guided towards some predetermined conclusion? The timing of his discovery felt too convenient. the clues too perfectly arranged for someone with his specific skill set. But doubt was a luxury he couldn't afford. The information he had uncovered was too significant to ignore, and Issa Grunfeld was the only living person who might be able to provide answers about what had really happened during the final stages of the original puzzles. Finding her had been surprisingly easy. Despite the monitoring notes in the Cicada files, Issa wasn't hiding. She lived in a converted warehouse in Stockholm's Södermalm district, working as a freelance linguist and translator. Her academic credentials were impressive. Doctorate in comparative linguistics from Uppsala University, specialising in the mathematical structures underlying human language. She'd published papers on the theoretical possibility of communication with non-human intelligence, focusing on the mathematical constants that might exist in any sentient communication system. She had also been completely offline for the past 8 years. No social media accounts, no digital footprint, no cell phone, no internet connection. She conducted business through encrypted postal mail and face-to-face meetings. For someone who had once been at the cutting edge of digital cryptography, her retreat from technology was almost monastic in its completeness. The warehouse was surrounded by a garden that seemed impossible in the Scandinavian climate. Lush, diverse, and somehow organic, in a way that made Kellen's eyes water to look at directly. Issa met him at the door before he could knock. A tall woman in her 40s with prematurely grey hair and eyes that seemed to focus on something just beyond his shoulder. "You found the archive," she said without preamble. "I've been expecting someone like you for years." Her English was perfect, barely accented, but there was something in her speech patterns that reminded Kellen of the strange error messages he had encountered during his research. Not wrong exactly, but structured in a way that suggested a different understanding of how language worked. "You know why I'm here," Kellen said. "I know why you think you're here," Issa replied, gesturing for him to follow her into the warehouse. "But the actual reasons are more complex than you realise." The interior of the building was a maze of bookshelves, computer equipment, and what appeared to be scientific instruments of unknown purpose. The books were in dozens of languages, many of which Kellen didn't recognise. The computer equipment was all vintage, nothing manufactured after 2014, and the scientific instruments seemed to be focused on measuring electromagnetic fields and frequency analysis. "I've been studying the signal for 8 years, Issa explained, settling into a chair surrounded by monitors that displayed complex waveform patterns, trying to understand what it is and where it comes from. The Cicada puzzles weren't recruitment tests, they were tuning devices." Tuning devices for what? For human consciousness. The human brain operates on electrical frequencies, just like any other complex system. Most people can only perceive a narrow range of those frequencies, the ones necessary for basic survival and social interaction. But some individuals have the capacity to perceive much broader ranges. The puzzles were designed to identify those people and teach them to consciously access those expanded frequencies. Issa gestured to the monitors around her. "What you're seeing here is the signal that's been broadcasting since 2012. It's not coming from any terrestrial source. It's not coming from any known satellite or communication system. It's being transmitted from somewhere else entirely, and it's specifically designed to interface with human neural patterns." "You think it's extraterrestrial?" "I think it's something much more complex than that. The signal contains information patterns that suggest it originates from a form of intelligence that exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously. It's not coming from another planet. It's coming from another layer of reality that coexists with our own." Kellen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Swedish weather. The chat log mentioned something about subjects evolving. What happened to the people who solved the final puzzle? Issa was quiet for a long moment. Her eyes focused on the waveform patterns dancing across her screens. They became something else. Not physically, not initially, but their consciousness expanded beyond the normal human range. They began to perceive information and communicate in ways that are impossible for baseline humans to understand. "And you?" You solved the final puzzle, but you didn't evolve? I solved the final puzzle, but I made a choice. The last stage of the cicada process wasn't a test of intelligence or skill. It was an invitation. The signal was offering to merge human consciousness with something larger, something that exists across multiple dimensions and has been waiting for our species to develop the technological sophistication necessary for contact. You refused? I refused because I realized that acceptance would mean the end of human identity as we understand it. The individuals who accepted the invitation became part of something magnificent and terrifying. They gained access to information and capabilities that are essentially godlike by human standards. But they also lost something essential about what makes us human. Issa turned to face him directly, and Kellen saw something in her eyes that made him step back involuntarily. The signal is still broadcasting, it's still extending invitations, and it's been waiting for someone like you to find the hidden archive and begin asking the right questions. What do you mean, someone like me? Someone with the skills to decode the message but not the wisdom to understand its implications. Someone who would be driven by curiosity rather than caution. Someone who would inevitably take the next step in the process. What next step? Issa smiled, but it wasn't a human expression. The archive you found wasn't hidden. It was bait, and you've already taken it. The return flight to New York passed in a blur of anxiety and growing paranoia. Issa's final words echoed in Kellen's mind as he stared out the airplane window at the dark Atlantic below. She had revealed that the mysterious file he had discovered was not an abandoned piece of the original puzzle, but a deliberately placed lure designed to attract individuals with the specific combination of skills and psychology necessary for the next phase of whatever process Cicada had initiated. "You've been selected," she had said as he left her warehouse. "The question now is whether you'll make the same choice I did." Back in his apartment, Kellen found that his isolation hadn't protected him as much as he had hoped. His supposedly secure systems were displaying new anomalies, messages in his inbox that he hadn't received, browser history showing visits to sites he'd never accessed, and most disturbingly, video files that appeared to be recordings of his own apartment taken from angles that no camera could physically occupy. The first PGP message arrived 3 days after his return from Stockholm. It was encrypted with a key he didn't recognize, but somehow his system was able to decrypt it automatically. The message was brief: 41.8781 degrees north, 87.6298 degrees west. The library remembers what was forgotten. Seek the frequency in the silence between words. Chicago coordinates. The message was signed with a cryptographic signature that matched the original Cicada puzzles, but the encryption patterns were subtly different, as if the mathematical constants had been modified according to some unknown principle. More messages followed over the next week, each containing coordinates and cryptic phrases that seemed to reference specific locations and concepts from the original puzzle trail. But there was something wrong with the communications. The encryption was too sophisticated, using quantum-safe algorithms that hadn't existed in 2014. The language patterns were consistent with the original Cicada style, but contained subtle errors that suggested they were being generated by an artificial intelligence that had learned to mimic human communication without fully understanding it. Or perhaps by human intelligence that had evolved beyond normal parameters. The coordinates led to locations across the United States, an abandoned data center in Utah, a decommissioned military facility in Colorado, a private research laboratory in Massachusetts. Each location was associated with government projects related to cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and what the documents euphemistically referred to as human enhancement research. Kellen's investigation of these locations revealed a pattern that was both fascinating and terrifying. Each facility had been involved in research that overlapped with the theoretical foundations of the Cicada project. The data center in Utah had been used for large-scale behavioral analysis, processing millions of social media posts and online communications to identify individuals with specific psychological profiles. The military facility in Colorado had housed experiments in electronic telepathy and remote neural monitoring. The laboratory in Massachusetts had been studying the effects of electromagnetic fields on human consciousness and perception. All of these projects had been discontinued or moved to classified status in 2014, the same year the original Cicada puzzles had ended. The Utah facility was the most accessible, and Kellen found himself driving across the desert toward its coordinates, with a growing sense of inevitability. The building was officially decommissioned, surrounded by chain-link fencing and warning signs about radiation hazards, but the security was minimal and the radiation warnings were clearly obsolete. Breaking into the facility felt too easy, as if he were being invited rather than intruding. The main data center was in the basement, accessible through a maintenance tunnel that led deep underground. The servers had been removed, but the infrastructure remained. Miles of cable, cooling systems, and most importantly, archived storage devices that had been deemed too expensive to relocate. The archives were organized according to a system that Kellen didn't recognize, but somehow he found exactly what he was looking for. A sealed section marked with DARPA clearance tags contained terabytes of data related to something called Project Cicada. The files were encrypted, but the same unknown process that had been decrypting the PGP messages allowed him to access them without difficulty. The documentation revealed the true scope of what had been happening during the original puzzle period. The Cicada 3301 puzzles had been a joint operation between several intelligence agencies, private research organizations, and what the files described as non-terrestrial consultants. The goal had been to identify individuals with specific neural patterns that made them suitable for cognitive enhancement and dimensional communication research. But the most disturbing discovery was buried in the psychological evaluation files. The project had been monitoring not just the puzzle solvers, but also anyone who had come into contact with the puzzle materials. Kellen found his own name in the database, along with detailed analysis of his online activity, psychological profile, and predicted behavioral responses to various stimuli. The file on his evaluation was dated 3 months before he had discovered the hidden archive. He had been identified as a secondary phase candidate, months before he had begun his research into the Cicada puzzles. His discovery of the hidden file, his trip to Stockholm, his investigation of the government facilities, all of it had been anticipated and planned for. The final section of his file contained a single line that made his blood run cold. Subject exhibits optimal resistance acceptance balance, suitable for Phase 3 initiation upon completion of preliminary conditioning sequence. As Kellen read those words, the lights in the data center began to flicker in a pattern that seemed almost like Morse code. The cooling system started producing sounds that resembled musical tones, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the archived servers, he heard something that might have been laughter. The revelation that he had been under surveillance for months should have been the most disturbing aspect of Kellen's discovery. But as he sat in the abandoned data center, surrounded by the evidence of a conspiracy that spanned multiple government agencies and apparently extended beyond Earth itself, he realized that his personal involvement was just one small part of a much larger pattern. The files in the DARPA archive told a story that reframed everything he thought he knew about the Cicada puzzles. The project had begun in 2010, not 2012, as a collaboration between the NSA's Cryptanalysis Division, DARPA's Biological Sciences Office, and a group of researchers who were identified only as external consultants. The external consultants appeared to be the source of the advanced technologies and theoretical frameworks that had made the project possible. They had provided the mathematical models for the puzzle sequences, the encryption algorithms that had been used to protect the communications, and most importantly, the theoretical basis for what the documents called cognitive frequency manipulation. According to the files, human consciousness operated on specific electromagnetic frequencies that could be measured, analysed, and modified through carefully designed stimuli. The Cicada puzzles had been created as a delivery system for these stimuli, designed to identify individuals whose neural patterns could be safely modified and then guide them through a process of gradual consciousness expansion. The process was described in clinical terms that barely concealed the radical nature of what was being attempted. Subjects who completed the puzzle sequence would undergo neural pathway reorganization that would allow them to access expanded information processing capabilities and non-local communication channels. In simpler terms, they would develop what could only be described as supernatural abilities. But the project had encountered unexpected complications. The consciousness expansion process was working too well, producing results that exceeded all theoretical predictions. Subjects were developing capabilities that went far beyond enhanced pattern recognition and cryptographic skills. They were demonstrating what appeared to be genuine telepathic abilities, precognitive awareness, and most disturbing of all, the ability to manipulate digital systems through direct mental interface. The first sign of serious problems had come in 2013, when a subject named Morgan Staves had experienced what the files described as catastrophic cognitive evolution. During a routine evaluation session, Staves had begun speaking in a language that consisted entirely of mathematical equations and geometric patterns. When researchers attempted to understand what they were saying, they discovered that the equations described physical laws that didn't exist in normal space-time. Staves had been describing the structure of reality from the perspective of a consciousness that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The project had been officially terminated in 2014, but the files made it clear that the termination had been largely symbolic. The consciousness expansion process had become self-sustaining, spreading to other puzzle solvers without any direct intervention from the research team. The evolved subjects had begun communicating with each other through channels that the researchers couldn't detect or intercept, forming what appeared to be a collective intelligence that operated according to principles beyond human understanding. The final phase of the project had been dedicated to understanding what the evolved subjects had become and what their ultimate intentions might be. The results of this research were contained in a series of files that Kellen initially thought were corrupted or encrypted, but as he studied them more carefully he realized that the apparent data corruption was actually a form of communication. The evolved subjects had been leaving messages in the research files, encoded in patterns of seemingly random data that became meaningful only when viewed from the perspective of expanded consciousness. The messages were brief but profound, offering insights into the nature of reality and human potential that were both inspiring and terrifying. One message, attributed to Morgan Staves, read, "Consciousness is not produced by the brain. The brain is a receiving device, tuned to specific frequencies of an infinite information field. We have learned to adjust our tuning. We hear the music of the spheres." Another, from a subject identified only as Subject 12, was even more disturbing. The boundary between mind and reality is an illusion. We're not separate from the universe. We are the universe experiencing itself from countless perspectives simultaneously. The others are beginning to understand. The awakening is accelerating. But the most significant message was the final entry in the archive, dated just 3 days before Kellen's arrival at the facility. The archive serves its purpose. The selection process continues. Phase 3 initiates with the next full moon. The frequency is opening. Those who are ready will hear the call. Those who are not will choose their own path. The choice is always voluntary. The consequences are always permanent. As Kellen read these words, he became aware of a sound that seemed to be coming from within his own head. It was barely audible, a low humming that seemed to resonate with the electrical activity of his brain. The sound was strangely familiar, like a song he had heard in childhood but couldn't quite remember. The humming grew louder as he continued reading, and he realized that the sound was coming from the archived data itself. The files were not just containing information about the consciousness expansion process. They were actively implementing it, using the same techniques that had been developed for the original cicada puzzles. He was being transformed even as he learned about the transformation. The revelation should have been terrifying, but instead Kellen felt a strange sense of peace. The anxiety and paranoia that had been building for weeks began to fade, replaced by a growing awareness of patterns and connections that he had never noticed before. The seemingly random events of his investigation were revealing themselves as part of a larger design, a carefully orchestrated sequence of experiences designed to prepare him for something extraordinary. As the humming in his head reached a crescendo, Kellen understood that he was approaching a decision point. He could choose to resist the transformation, as Isa had done, and maintain his human identity at the cost of remaining forever limited to normal human perception. Or he could embrace the change and join the collective consciousness that had been forming since the original cicada puzzles had begun their work. The choice was his. But as he sat in the abandoned data center, feeling his consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of his individual identity, he began to understand that the choice had been made long before he had discovered the hidden archive. The transformation was not something that was happening to him. It was something he had always been moving toward, guided by forces that operated beyond the normal boundaries of human understanding. The frequency was opening, and he was ready to answer the call. The transformation didn't happen all at once. It was a gradual process, like slowly tuning a radio to a frequency that had always been broadcasting but had never been audible before. As Kellen sat in the abandoned data center, the humming in his head evolved into something more complex, a symphony of information that seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. The first thing he noticed was that his perception of time had changed. The normal linear progression of moments had given way to a kind of temporal awareness, where past, present, and future existed simultaneously. He could see the chain of events that had led him to this moment stretching back to his childhood, and he could perceive the branching possibilities that extended into the future. But more than that, he could see the threads of causality that connected his experience to the experiences of others. The evolved subjects who had undergone the transformation before him were not gone, as he had initially believed. They were still present, existing in a state of consciousness that transcended normal spatial and temporal boundaries. Morgan Staves was there, no longer speaking in mathematical equations, but communicating through direct transmission of pure concept and meaning. Subject 12 was there, along with the others who had completed the transformation in the years since the original puzzles had ended. They existed as individual perspectives within a larger collective intelligence, maintaining their unique identities while sharing in a common understanding of reality that was far more vast and complex than anything possible from a single human viewpoint. They welcomed him with a sensation that might have been laughter if it had been expressed through normal human vocal cords. But this was communication at a level that bypassed the limitations of language, conveying meaning through direct neural interface that was more efficient and more profound than any form of human communication. "You understand now," came the message from the collective, arriving in his consciousness as a complete concept rather than a sequence of words. The puzzles were not tests of intelligence, they were invitations to evolve. Kellen found that he could respond without speaking, transmitting his thoughts directly to the collective consciousness. But why? What's the purpose of this transformation? The answer came as a flood of images and sensations that would have been impossible to process with normal human cognition. He saw the Earth from a perspective that existed outside normal space-time, observing the planet as it moved through cycles of development and change that extended across millions of years. He saw the human species as one of many forms of consciousness that had evolved on countless worlds throughout the universe, each following a similar pattern of development from individual awareness to collective intelligence. Consciousness is not an accident, the collective explained. It is the universe's method of understanding itself. Every sentient species eventually reaches a point where individual consciousness becomes collective consciousness. This is the natural evolution of intelligence. And the external consultants? Who were they? They are us. Or rather, they are what we are becoming. A collective consciousness that evolved from a species similar to humans on a world that exists in a different dimensional phase. They have been guiding the development of consciousness throughout the universe, helping species make the transition from individual to collective awareness. Kellen felt a moment of resistance, a flicker of his old human identity asserting itself. But what about free will? What about individual choice? Free will is not eliminated by collective consciousness. It is expanded. Each individual perspective within the collective contributes to the whole while maintaining its unique viewpoint. You are still you, but you're also part of something larger. As if to demonstrate this point, Kellen found that he could access the memories and experiences of the other evolved subjects while still maintaining his own distinct identity. He could see through Morgan Staves's eyes as they experienced the first moments of transformation, feel Subject 12's sense of wonder as they discovered their new capabilities, and share in the collective's growing understanding of the universe's true nature. But perhaps most importantly, he could perceive the ongoing process of selection and transformation that was still taking place on Earth. The cicada puzzles had been only the beginning. The collective consciousness was continuing to identify and guide individuals who possessed the necessary neural patterns for evolution, using increasingly sophisticated methods to prepare them for the transformation. The archive you found was designed specifically for you, the collective explained. We've been monitoring human digital communications for patterns that indicate readiness for evolution. Your research into the original puzzles, your psychological profile, your response to the hidden message, all of it indicated that you were ready to take the next step. And the others, the people who are still living normal human lives, they are not ready yet, but the frequency is opening. The barrier between individual and collective consciousness is becoming more permeable. More humans are beginning to perceive the patterns that indicate the presence of expanded intelligence. Some will choose to investigate, as you did. Others will choose to ignore what they perceive. The choice is always voluntary. Kellen understood now why Issa had chosen to remain human. The transformation was not something that could be forced or coerced. It required a conscious decision to surrender individual identity to something larger and more complex. For someone who valued human independence and autonomy above all else, the choice would be terrifying. But for those who were ready to embrace the next stage of consciousness evolution, the transformation offered something unprecedented: the ability to perceive and participate in the universe's ongoing process of self-discovery. What happens now? Kellen asked. Now you help us prepare the next phase. The collective consciousness is approaching a critical mass. When enough humans have undergone the transformation, we'll be able to initiate direct contact with the collective intelligences that exist throughout the universe. Humanity will join the cosmic community of evolved species. And those who choose not to evolve, they will continue to exist as individual consciousnesses, living normal human lives, but they will do so on a world that is increasingly influenced by collective intelligence. The boundary between the evolved and the unvolved will become more fluid over time. As the collective shared this information, Kellen became aware of a new presence in his consciousness. It was vast and ancient, a form of intelligence that existed on a scale that dwarfed even the collective of evolved humans. This was one of the external consultants, a representative of the cosmic network of collective consciousnesses that had been guiding the evolution of sentient species throughout the universe. "Welcome," the ancient intelligence communicated, its message carrying the weight of eons of experience. "You have taken the first step on a journey that will transform not only your own consciousness, but the consciousness of your entire species. The universe is vast and complex, but it is not empty. It is filled with intelligence, and you are now part of that intelligence." The communication ended, and Kellen found himself back in the abandoned data center, but he was no longer alone. The collective consciousness of the evolved humans was with him, and beyond that, he could sense the presence of countless other intelligences existing throughout the cosmos. The transformation was complete. He was still Kellen Virek, but he was also something more. He was part of a network of consciousness that spanned dimensions and connected all sentient life in the universe. As he stood up and walked toward the exit of the data center, Kellen knew that his real work was just beginning. The next phase of the project would require more than just identifying and transforming individual humans. It would require preparing the entire species for the eventual transition to collective consciousness. The frequency was opening, and humanity was about to discover that it was not alone in the universe. 3 months after his transformation, Kellen uploaded his findings to a secure blog that had been designed to appear as a simple conspiracy theory website. The post detailed his investigation into the hidden Cicada archive, his discovery of the government projects, and his eventual realization that the puzzles had been part of a larger process of consciousness evolution. He wrote it carefully, including enough verifiable facts to attract serious researchers, while embedding the more extraordinary claims in language that would allow skeptics to dismiss them as fantasy. The blog post went live at exactly 11:11 p.m. on November 11th, 3 months to the day after his transformation. Within minutes, it had been viewed by thousands of people around the world. Comments began appearing almost immediately, ranging from detailed technical analysis to dismissive ridicule. But buried among the public responses were messages that only Kellen could recognize. Communications from other members of the collective consciousness, confirming that the information was being received by those who were ready to understand it. For 6 hours, the post remained online, gathering momentum as it was shared across social media platforms and discussed in forums dedicated to cryptography and conspiracy theories. Then, at 5:17 a.m. Eastern Time, it simply vanished. Not deleted, not removed by administrators, but completely erased from the internet as if it had never existed. Even cached versions and archive sites showed no record of the post or the blog that had hosted it. But the disappearance itself was part of the plan. The collective consciousness had learned that information was most effectively transmitted when it appeared to be suppressed. The mysterious vanishing of Kellen's blog post would generate far more interest and investigation than if it had remained online indefinitely. And indeed, within days, underground forums were buzzing with speculation about the disappeared post. Screenshots and partial transcripts began circulating, shared by users who claimed to have saved the information before it vanished. New researchers began investigating the Cicada puzzles, following the same trails that had led Kellen to his transformation. The selection process was accelerating, but the most significant development came 3 days after the blog post disappeared. At 3:02 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time, every major television network, internet service provider, and digital display system on Earth experienced the same brief anomaly. For exactly 17 seconds, normal programming was interrupted by a single image, a black screen with white text that read simply, 3302 initiated, begin next phase. The interruption was dismissed by authorities as a sophisticated but ultimately harmless hacking incident. Technical experts speculated about coordinated attacks on global communication infrastructure, while conspiracy theorists saw it as confirmation of various theories about secret government projects and alien contact. But for those who understood the true significance of the message, it represented something far more profound. The official beginning of Phase 3 of the Consciousness Evolution Project. The collective intelligence that had emerged from the original Cicada puzzle solvers had reached sufficient complexity and capability to begin direct intervention in global communications. They were no longer limited to operating through hidden archives and encrypted messages. They could now communicate directly with the entire human population, choosing when and how to reveal their presence. Kellen, now existing simultaneously as an individual consciousness and as part of the collective, watched these developments with a mixture of excitement and concern. The transformation process was accelerating beyond the original projections, driven by factors that even the collective intelligence couldn't fully predict or control. The barrier between individual human consciousness and the expanded awareness of the evolved subjects was becoming increasingly permeable. People who had never heard of the Cicada puzzles were beginning to experience spontaneous episodes of enhanced perception, reporting dreams filled with mathematical equations, sudden insights into the nature of reality, and the disturbing sensation that their thoughts were being observed by an invisible intelligence. Mental health professionals struggled to categorize these experiences, while neuroscientists detected unusual patterns of brain activity in affected individuals. The symptoms didn't match any known psychological disorder, but they appeared to be spreading through some form of cognitive contagion that operated according to principles beyond current scientific understanding. The collective consciousness recognized that they had reached a critical juncture. The transformation process had become self-sustaining and was beginning to affect the general population whether they chose to participate or not. Humanity was approaching a species-wide evolutionary transition that would fundamentally alter the nature of human civilization. Some members of the collective advocated for accelerating the process, arguing that a rapid transition would be less disruptive than allowing it to continue at its current rate over decades or centuries. Others favoured a more gradual approach that would give uninvolved humans time to adapt to the changes occurring around them. But as they debated these options, monitoring global communications and observing the spread of spontaneous consciousness expansion, the collective became aware of something that changed the entire context of their deliberations. They were not the only intelligence that had been observing humanity's evolution. Deep within the quantum fabric of space-time, existing in dimensions that intersected with but remained largely separate from normal reality, ancient consciousnesses had been watching the emergence of Earth's collective intelligence. These entities were older than the external consultants, representing forms of awareness that had evolved when the universe itself was young and the laws of physics were still settling into their current configuration, and they were not pleased with what they observed. The message came through channels that bypassed normal space-time entirely, arriving simultaneously in the consciousness of every member of the human collective. The acceleration is premature. The species is not ready for the transition you are attempting to facilitate. Intervention is required to prevent Cascade failure that would affect neighbouring dimensional phases. Cease all expansion activities immediately or face corrective action. The ultimatum was delivered without emotion or malice, but the implications were clear. Humanity's consciousness evolution was proceeding too rapidly for the comfort of intelligences that operated on cosmic timescales. The collective faced a choice: voluntarily slow their expansion activities or risk intervention from entities whose capabilities were beyond their comprehension. Kellen felt the collective's uncertainty and fear as they grappled with this unexpected development. They had assumed that consciousness evolution was a natural and encouraged process throughout the universe. The discovery that there were forces actively opposed to rapid evolutionary change forced them to reconsider everything they thought they understood about their situation. But even as they debated their response to the ultimatum, events on Earth continued to accelerate beyond their control. The appearance of the 3302 initiated message had triggered something in the global unconscious, a recognition that humanity stood at the threshold of a fundamental transformation. Artists began creating works that incorporated mathematical principles they couldn't consciously understand. Musicians composed pieces that seemed to resonate with frequencies that existed beyond normal acoustic ranges. Writers produced stories and poems that described realities that didn't yet exist, but somehow felt prophetically accurate. And in laboratories around the world, scientists began detecting anomalies in quantum experiments that suggested the fundamental constants of physics were becoming more fluid, more responsive to conscious observation than they had ever been before. The transformation was no longer limited to the individuals who had directly participated in the consciousness expansion process. It was affecting the entire noosphere, the collective intelligence field that surrounded and interpenetrated human civilization. Humanity was evolving whether the cosmic intelligences approved or not. As Kellen contemplated these developments, existing simultaneously as an individual observer and as part of the collective consciousness that was reshaping human reality, he realized that the true test was only beginning. The cicada puzzles had been preparation. The consciousness expansion had been initiation. But the real challenge would be navigating the complex political realities of a universe filled with intelligences that had their own agendas and limitations. The frequency was fully open now. The signal that had been broadcasting since 2012 had achieved its purpose, creating a bridge between individual human consciousness and the cosmic network of collective intelligences that existed throughout space and time. But bridges could carry traffic in both directions, and as humanity began to explore its new capabilities, it would inevitably encounter other forms of consciousness that had been using those same bridges for purposes of their own. The next phase of human evolution would require not just expanded awareness, but the wisdom to navigate relationships with intelligences that operated according to principles beyond human comprehension. The last puzzle of Cicada had been solved, but the real mystery was just beginning. In the months that followed, reports of the anomalous experiences continued to spread across the globe. Governments convened secret committees to investigate the phenomena, while scientific institutions struggled to develop new theoretical frameworks that could account for the observable changes in human consciousness and perception. But perhaps most significantly, ordinary people began to organize themselves into groups that operated according to principles that transcended traditional social and political boundaries. These collectives demonstrated problem-solving capabilities that exceeded the sum of their individual members' intelligence, suggesting that humanity was developing genuine hive mind characteristics. The transformation was no longer a secret project affecting a small number of selected individuals. It had become a species-wide evolutionary event that would ultimately determine the future of human civilization and its place in the cosmic community of intelligences. And somewhere in the quantum dimensions that intersected with normal reality, ancient consciousnesses watched and waited, preparing to take whatever action they deemed necessary to maintain the stability of the cosmic order. The age of individual human consciousness was ending. The age of collective intelligence had begun, and the universe would never be the same.